Uh, what's up, WordPress warriors? I'm Patrick Gallagher. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GridPane, and I'm joined here today with Calvin Aiken. Is it Alkin or Aiken? Alkin. Okay. And Calvin, for those of you who have been hiding under a rock and not paying attention to our Facebook group, Calvin is one of our most consistent contributors. Calvin and I met for the first time in Porto at WordCamp EU, and he's been working on something really, really interesting over the last few months that now we're sort of unveiling as part of the Black Friday, Cyber Monday promotion, and that is his security suite called Fortress. And so we're going to be talking about that today, hopefully shedding some more light on what that is. And so I guess let's just start with just what's your background, what brought you to WordPress, what have you been doing before this? Because I think that'll kind of inform how we got to where we are right now.
I mean, I started with WordPress basically the way many people started, building sites for clients locally and whatever, yeah. But pretty quickly, like at the start, I was using typical stuff, page builders, Gutenberg, whatever, basically the way many people build what you would call a typical WordPress site. And then quickly, I started moving into doing more like custom enterprise PHP development for WordPress. And yeah, it's been a process, and I've been doing that since 1.5 years now, the WordPress development. And yeah, recently stopped doing all the client work to focus on the Fortress stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those of you that don't have enough context on this, like when he says enterprise PHP development, we're talking about like, whereas a lot of us might say, oh, we've got a client that's doing 7 or 8 figures on their e-commerce site. We're going to take WooCommerce and we're going to bundle all these other plugins together. Calvin would look at a situation like that and go, no, let's actually just build this from scratch. And I think actually that's sort of what got you rolling in this direction of 2FA, at least, right? Is you were doing an enterprise build for somebody?
Correct. We had a client where he was selling a lot of stuff digitally, but it was all digital goods. So no shipping involved, no, it was single language. So WooCommerce was like not the right fit for this type of client. And for a matter of fact, none of the other WordPress e-commerce plugins at that time were. So we basically, the website is half WordPress, and then there's a custom part to it, which just talks directly to the Stripe API, and basically has a custom interface. And then in the background, we are just shipping off the orders to Stripe, and started building a store this way for this client, which has many benefits. It is way more maintainable because it's basically, it's built, it doesn't change, it works, Stripe doesn't break, and Stripe just took a lot of that work off us. Like one example is the credit card fraud prevention and all that good stuff, which is in WooCommerce still like a problem where people can like test thousands and thousands of credit cards on your sites because there's no rate limiting or anything like that in WooCommerce. But Stripe already like probably has the best system in the industry for preventing all of this. So like it cut down development time in that regard, and it's just been like very pleasant. And the way we got into the security stuff is basically the client has a lot of customers which visit his site very infrequently. So they were getting like a ton of like support requests, people telling like, I don't remember my email, don't remember my password, because if you only visit the site like occasionally every couple of months or whatever, your typical process for logging in basically looks like I'm clicking, I forgot my password, request a new password, and then I log in, and the next time I want to log in, I repeat the same process. Right. So we started building like a passwordless magic link login authentication system for the client, which then kept evolving, added two-factor authentication and a lot of other stuff, which basically turned out to be like the version 0 or whatever you want to call it of Fortress. But it was like super tailored towards that specific client, like his needs and how their system works. So it was not really like reusable or extractable to not even another website, but let alone like a commercially sellable product. And this is what we've been working on for a very long time now, to like extract this into a commercial product, and it's finally shaping up. So this is how we got into the security stuff.
Yeah. So really right around Porto, I think it'll be useful to add a little bit of context there. We tried to kind of escalate or speed
which was like in June, right? In June, May,
Yep. So around that time, Calvin had been doing some more research, trying to see, okay, we're gonna zero in on the two-factor authentication side of this thing. Let's go and look at best practice. Let's go and look at what other people are doing and see what we like, see what we don't like. And you found your first couple of bugs, and you responsibly reported those to those people. And then we tried to expedite the process by which a CVE would get it reported and get it turned around and get it fixed, because it was a pretty serious bug, if I remember correctly. And then
security issue, not a bug,
security vulnerability, and then that sort of opened the floodgates to roughly 24 plugins and nearly 60 vulnerabilities discovered and disclosed over the last 6 months. North of 15 million sites impacted,
and probably plugins that, like any one of those, you probably know them.
Yeah, right, right. So to be fair, you have disclosed all of these things very responsibly to these companies. You can go and see updates that have happened on people's roadmaps and their release notes. And so we're not going to drag anybody through the mud, but you saw some very consistent things that were being done incorrectly. And clearly those things are not happening inside of Fortress. And I talked a little bit about this yesterday, is the idea that, like when a security plugin doesn't have necessarily access to the file system or doesn't have access to the host, they have to make all kinds of assumptions, and they have to kind of cut corners, which you absolutely don't have to do with Fortress. And so maybe you can add a little bit more color to, I was talking like about read SQL injection issues, and how that's kind of a pervasive problem that's always going to be true with WordPress forever, and how it is that you actually want to solve for that kind of permanently with something like Fortress.
Yeah, I guess like two examples that immediately come to mind is a lot of security features depend on being correctly able to determine what the actual connecting IP address is. So basically, what is the IP address of the person that is going to the site? And because all WordPress hosts use like widely different network setups, like some have Cloudflare into Nginx, some have Varnish into Nginx, into whatever, like everybody has a different stack. It's really hard, like it's impossible to solve for this generically. It's not possible to create a solution to detect the IP address correctly, generally, and without being like vulnerable to some sort of abuse in that sense, which is like the IP spoofing, where somebody can like trick your site into thinking that I have a different IP than the one that I'm actually using, which in some cases, it's not a big deal if you're using the IP address for like logging purposes, or for example, like who submitted a comment or whatever. But in many security contexts, like rate limiting is the obvious example, like this can lead to really like serious security issues, DOS vulnerabilities, and a lot of other things, which is the problem because all currently available solutions, like Patrick mentioned, they try to be like as broad as possible so that it works on like every host imaginable under the sun, and which is why we found them to be very vulnerable to these sort of attacks. And the way you can solve that by like building specific solutions and cooperations with hosts is because they know their environment, so you know what it's safe to rely on, and so you can prevent like whole sorts of attacks this way if you work directly with the host. The second example would be basically all security related features require some sort of secret that has to be kept private in order for everything to be secure. Like a typical example would be the secrets that you have in your WP config file. If those are leaked, basically anybody can compromise your site. And what these plugins do for, let's say, two-factor authentication, what you should not be doing is storing those secrets in the database, because this means, which is basically they use the database because this is the common, how you say it, denominator. Like you always know that WordPress, every WordPress site will have a MySQL database. So this is the one thing you can rely on that to be present, which is why they use the database. But this is not good because like SQL injection attacks are unfortunately still like basically any WordPress site has one at some point in time due to either like just the last minor core update fixed an SQL injection vulnerability in WordPress core, but could also be in a theme or plugin. So if anybody can ever obtain one of those and can read your database, which is once obtained trivially with pen testing tools, they can get out all those secrets, and from that point on, like your security is basically useless because they share the same secrets as your site, which is the only thing keeping it secure in this aspect of two-factor authentication. One shared secret is used to generate those 6-digit one-time passwords that you all probably know, and anybody that has access to this secret like can generate a valid code, for example. So if instead you were cooperating with the host and you generate those secrets as part of a build system of when you click in GridPane, like create a new site, and then GridPane automatically creates those secrets, stores them securely either in a file or even better in the environment process. So they just injected environment variables so that they are not even present in your website backups, for example. This is even better. Then you can achieve like much greater security because like you rule out this entire category of read-only SQL injection attacks entirely. So two examples. There are many more. These are the first ones that come to mind.
Yeah. So the one that looking back at some of your security research, the one that I thought was so hilarious is you were actually describing, okay, if they obtain, your symmetrical key secrets, they can jump over here and generate the 6-digit TOTP. And you described this exact sort of esoteric process by which they could do that. And then you said right below it, it's like, or they could just grab your recovery code, which was also stored in plain text in the database. And it was like, so why in the hell would they do all of that other stuff when they can literally just go, oh, there's that, And it's like, unfortunately, you're exactly right. The only thing that a plugin developer can know will be definitively true at every host everywhere is they're going to get access to a MySQL database. And so that's where we'll stick stuff. But clearly that's not the right way to do it. So talk briefly about...
And then just to add to it, and then the one, let's say, one level above, just storing everything as plain text in a database, like a lot of vendors were doing. Basically, they were encrypting secrets. So for those of you who don't know what it means, encrypting is basically reversible. So you take a given input, a plain text, you encrypt it, and then later using the same encryption key, you can reverse that process. This is encryption. So what they did is they encrypted secrets that were used in a security application context, but then they store the same encryption key also in the database. So they were storing the encrypted secrets for the security context in the database, multiple of them, but they also stored the plain text encryption key used to generate all those secrets in the first place, just right next to them, which basically means it's not non-encryption at all. You could have, like, the only thing stopping an attacker at that point is reading your options table and seeing that then option 2, like some plugin 2FA secret encrypted, and the next one is some plugin encryption key, and just reversing that. Because you can look at the source code.
Yeah.
So this is the other one.
Yeah, and tragically there's even more comical versions of things that we've seen here as this stuff has all played out over the last few months. But let's talk briefly about the one that kind of blew my mind and that made me come to the conclusion. I don't know if you remember the punchline where I was like, oh, this is actually a way in which GoDaddy is a better host than GridPane. And it was around rate limiting of 2FA, right? So it's like, if there is no rate limiting and there's no failure.
I don't know what we're talking about. Basically, what all plugins are lacking of is rate limiting for the two-factor authentication process. Generally, you only need two-factor authentication if you assume that your first login credentials have already been compromised. That's the entire premise of two-factor authentication. If you think that your primary credentials can never ever be compromised, like, why would you get two-factor authentication?
Right.
This is just a premise. So it only makes sense to talk about this under the assumption that the first credentials are already compromised through some way, phishing, social engineering, brute force, whatever.
They got your folder that says passwords on the side of it. They walked into your office and grabbed that.
Correct.
Shelf. Yeah.
Yeah, or the sticky notes on your laptop. I don't know. They're compromised in some way. At that point, the most used two-factor authentication seem the time-based one-time passwords, which are the typical 6 digits that many sites use. 6 digits are only 1 million total combinations, which can be brute forced in like a matter of days, if not hours. Many people think that the 30-second interval at which the code changes, like your app on your phone probably like rotates the secret that you see every 30 seconds, that doesn't change anything for security, because every single guess that you make is still 1 out of 1 million probability that you guess it right. Like,
correct.
It could be the same secret. So, and that is like trivial to brute force if there's no rate limiting protection at all. Like I said, in a matter of hours, if not like 2 to 3 days, this is very trivially brute forceable. It only depends on how many concurrent requests like your PHP can handle. So if you have a really fast server and you can handle 10 requests at a second, so this will be brute force faster than if you were on a really cheap shared hosting where you can only get in like half a request a second until the host starts rate limiting you for being too noisy or whatever, basically.
Right. Yeah. So if you had,
so this is something that
if you're running the wrong 2FA plugin and you're able to handle thousands of requests concurrently on a really fast GridPane server, then this is even worse. So maybe all of our customers should just go to GoDaddy, and then they'll be more safe by being much, much slower. But clearly they won't. So I guess, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of just the 4 main key features that we're rolling out as V1 of Fortress? Obviously, we've talked on 2FA, but can you talk a little bit about the other 3 kind of main planks that we're building on this foundation here?
Sure. So we are like deliberately focusing on only solving what can be effectively solved at the plugin level. Basically, once your Nginx server forwards a request to your PHP FPM pool, there are different levels. Never mind. Let's not go into the details in that. But let's think. One example would be a firewall or the 6G firewall that you have in GridPane. This runs at the Nginx layer in GridPane. So it's much faster to do it that way than to, like, you could build the same rules in PHP and run them inside the WordPress plugin, which quite frankly many plugins do. They have their own custom PHP firewalls and filter out bad requests. But this is going to slow down your site significantly more than if you're doing it at the Nginx level, which runs in C, in pure C. So we only focus on what we can effectively solve at the plugin level, and other aspects of security, which are also important, are handled at the hosting or network layer, like up the chain. So
right. So yes, to make it to drive. Sorry. So to drive his point home, what things like malware scanning, things like firewalls, those kinds of things should not be happening at the plugin level. They should be happening at the stack level. And then things like, massive DDoS protection, like it doesn't matter what you do at the box level. If you're not solving that upstream at Cloudflare, with a service like Cloudflare, you're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to get saturated, and you're going to be able to take a box out. So what Calvin, has decided to do, like there's a whole bunch of things that a bunch of plugins that they add in, and a lot of it's just security theater, and or it's really, really inefficient. You should not be doing it at the plugin level. You should only be doing these main things. And so 2FA is
ineffective would be, like we mentioned, the firewall at the plugin level, malware scanning, those things, like they can work. I mean, the malware scanning, not quite, because I don't think that you can reliably run a malware scanner at the same level where the malware sits. Because if I were to create a malware and infect your site, the first thing that I'm going to do in my malware, if your file system is not immutable, I would just like alter the code of your malware scanning plugin so that my malware is always whitelisted, because it's PHP, it's not compiled. Like I can change the running code on your website. So that is something that in my opinion, like you cannot effectively solve at the plugin basically at the same level where the malware sits.
Correct.
This will be ineffective, but there's also stuff that, like, quite frankly, like it just slows down your site and doesn't do anything for security, which is what we call security theater, like Patrick mentioned. Let's see, like one example would be, like change the user ID of administrator from 1 to like some random number. That doesn't do anything for your security. Like this would only stop like the most unskilled, like how you call them, script kiddie, right? That's how you call them. Yeah. The most unskilled script kiddie, which just copy paste like a SQL query from Stack Overflow into a terminal. But there are automated tools which like in a matter of seconds will like take down the entire database and scrape all the content like interactively without you doing anything. So it does not do anything for security, but it slows down your site, because for each request, what you have to do is you have to look into the database, fetch the options, check, do we want to do this? No. Then do that. If yes, do this. And this happens on each and every request. So your site gets slowed down eventually, which is why a lot of the common plugins are like really like they're heavy, like they're resource intensive.
Yeah. And again, it's like moving, we moved WP login, or we moved WP admin, or we changed the database prefix. It's like,
correct. That does not do anything for security.
So we know we're not focusing on nonsense things. What are the three other things other than 2FA that we are focusing on here with Fortress?
Correct. We have 2FA. The next thing is password security. Basically, there's like a lot of tickets on track where like a lot of people are arguing a lot with the core team to finally fix like the password security practices that WordPress is employing, but like in my opinion, it will never be fixed. Like there's been so little interest in this. Which is partly due to the backwards compatibility. No, that's not even true. You could do it backwards compatibly, but the core team, like, it's just not the priority for them, which is why WordPress is still using, they're using a library called PHPass, which is like extreme legacy software at this point. Like it was written when PHP 4 was the newest version, like probably a decade ago, like more probably. I don't quite remember, but PHP 4 is like prehistoric.
Yeah, really. Right.
That's when this library was written that WordPress is still using. And at that time, PHP did not have all the low-level, way more secure cryptography functions that are present since PHP 7.2, where they, but now in PHP you have proper password hashing API, which uses bcrypt or Argon, depending on your system. You also have Libsodium, which is like what we are using everywhere in our plugin, which is also a C extension for PHP, which is bundled in 7.2, which is many people like consider it like one of, if not the best secure like encryption libraries or encryption tools available in PHP basically. So what we do is we change the way WordPress hashes passwords and replace it with like something that is like appropriately for websites that you build today starting in 2022. Like you would never ever, if you were to create a new website today, employ an MD5 based password hashing scheme, which is what WordPress is still using. Like them doing many iterations of MD5, but it's still clearly to brute force with pen testing tools like Hashcat. So we rip all that out because WordPress has like the concept of pluggable functions that you as a developer can override in basically a plugin or theme or whatever, and we replace that with way more secure password hashing. And what we managed to do is that it's compatible with existing sites. So once you activate it, you can run CLI commands, which will rehash all of the hashes that you already have stored in your database without the user needing to reset their password. So all of your users can still reset, can still use their old passwords. But let's say big if, of course, if your database were to compromise the day after you run the script, the migration script, those hashes, like they can't be reversed with anything that like is currently available outside, like I don't know, like computing laboratories or quantum computers.
Yeah,
or
sure.
It's like a significant computing time basically compared to what it's currently done by WordPress to crack those hashes.
Yeah.
As an alternative, you can also, because probably your users are using really insecure passwords, you can also force reset all passwords for all users, prompting them to choose new passwords, which then are subject to a password policy. Basically, Dropbox, like many years ago, created an industry solution for that, a library which reliably calculates password strength, but not on basically arbitrary like rules like must have an uppercase or must have lowercase letter and a digit, because once you enforce those rules, humans always behave in a predictable way, and they will always put, for example, the special character at the beginning or at the end. Humans will never like go ahead, use their normal password and then insert a special character in the middle of the word. That's just not like how humans think, and hackers and pen testing tools know that, so they will just only try brute force them at the beginning. So this is not really the most effective way to do it. And what we have integrated now is, for example, where you can't like it takes stuff like the proximity on the keyboard into consideration, for example. So you can't use many letters that are close to each other on the keyboard, or you can't use anything that is related to the website, your user account, your email. So for example, if you're signing into gridpane.com, you can't just go ahead and take your regular password that you use everywhere and append or prefix it with Gridpane, right?
Yeah.
because like hackers know that is what people are doing. So it significantly lowers the security of your passwords. And these are the main parts for the password stuff.
Yeah.
Obviously, I can't go into everything right now to take too long, but these are the main features. The next thing is rate limiting, or effective, I said, lock-in throttling. So many people confuse like what Patrick already mentioned, like rate limiting for DOS protection with rate limiting for lock-in throttling. These are two different things. We are solving the lock-in throttling part because, like Patrick already mentioned, you can't rate limit somebody like once you've already booted the entire WordPress installation. At that point, like 95% of the entire resources have already been consumed because WordPress is already loaded. So it's not possible to rate limit against a request flood at the box level.
You do that.
You do it at upstream. Yeah. We handle the lock-in throttling, but in a way that is way more advanced than what's currently being employed. It's more advanced than fail to ban, because fail to ban is operating always under the assumption that an attacker is using one fixed IP, which is because fail to ban also was written many, many years ago, where the assumption was still valid, but today, like with all the cloud computing and whatever, it's not trivial, but it's easier to obtain many, many, many IP addresses, different IP addresses, to start brute force attacks, and then rotate them. So fail to ban will only pick up one attempt for each IP address every 30 minutes. And then they are rotated again. So your rules will never apply in fail to ban. And what we have done is we limit across 4 different dimensions. So we rate limit logins based on the fixed username. So all logins from different IP addresses for the username Patrick are rate limited. Then we limit at a higher scale for single IP addresses. So this is another problem with how plugins currently do it, or also fail to ban, is if you only rate limiting based on IP address, which is at the start what we were doing at the client I mentioned at the beginning, is you were people legitimate users were getting banned because they were using shared proxies, or they were using public Wi-Fi, or they were using a rotating IP address.
Right. Or they're all, so you got a bunch of people in the same office building all trying to log in.
There will be another use case depending on what it is that you're selling. If you have many people from the same office, if you have failed to ban configured to ban IP permanently after 3 failed attempts in, let's say, 30 minutes, and then 3 employees log in and they fail their login, then that IP entire office is banned. So that there's a problem with fail to ban. So we rate limited way at a higher level, and not permanently for single IP, because we anyway also have the protection for the username, which can be attacked from many different IPs. But let's say after 5 attempts for the username Patrick, that username is rate limited, while the username Calvin is not. I hope that makes sense. And then the last one is we rate limited globally. So over your entire site, failed logins are rate limited. Let's say your site has, it obviously depends on the scale that you're at, but let's say normally your site has 60 failed login attempts over the course of a day, right? If all of a sudden you're at 200 within 1 hour, you know that you're probably under attack from which is a distributed brute force attack across multiple user accounts. So this is the most complicated to protect against, which is basically, let's say I obtain the credentials from all users at gridpane.com, all email addresses and all passwords. And because I know that people always reuse their passwords, I go ahead and try all of those username and password combinations at runcloud.com or something similar at, I don't know, DigitalOcean, who knows, right? Something I know is related somewhat to this. And just like if I have like a list of 50,000 username password combinations, like one of them probably works, right? And I have a compromised account. So instead of trying 50,000 different passwords against one account, a more sophisticated attacker would just try either a list of credentials he already has, or he would try the most common password against 50,000 different users.
Correct.
So, which would bypass all IP-based rate limits and also the username rate limits, because you only have one failed attempt per username. And then you rotate the IPs, which is why the only way to prevent, like somewhat effectively against this, is to rate limit globally against failed login attempts. But, however, the problem with that is that at some point, an attacker might be able to turn this into a DOS attack, preventing legitimate users from logging in. So, which is why then, like other solutions, like bog users down with captures or the Cloudflare challenges or whatever, which is like not the best user experience. So what we've done is basically once you log in once into the site at a given device, we store a cryptographically signed cookie. I won't go into details of that, but we store a cookie on your device, which we call it device ID. And if you have one of those cookies, you can always bypass all rate limiting for your user account. So if we know that Patrick has logged in once, and this cookie never expires, or like years, so it should not expire ever unless you clear your browser cookies. So if the site then knows that Patrick has from this device logged in once in ever, basically, he can always bypass all rate limiting for his username only. So an attacker could...
That is kind of two-factor authentication just for a device. And, you know, like basically it's me, I have the device and I have the cookie, and then I'm going to supply my 2FA code or whatever it is. But this is a pretty big deal because, you know, when fail to ban, you know, like one of the most common tickets that we get for fail to ban is people have gotten themselves locked out. But it's like if an attack is happening at scale and you can't even access your site, then it doesn't matter how secure your site is because your site is effectively unavailable. And it's like almost nobody talks about availability in the context of security because it's just like, oh, well, we just assume that to be the case, you know, and it's like,
which is one of the most common vulnerabilities that we saw and reported in plugins, is that using IP spoofing, you could effectively prevent anybody from ever logging in at that site again permanently.
Well, and you saw one, and again, we won't name any names, but you told me about an interesting hack where theoretically we could be competing in a certain space, and let's say Black Friday, Cyber Monday's coming up. Like if I knew things about my users, I could theoretically kind of blacklist them over at RunCloud, theoretically, you know, or at Kinsta, and it's just like, oh, everybody that I know that's interested in this thing, I'll just blacklist Kinsta over here, and then no one can go and buy their Black Friday, Cyber Monday thing. Like, and there's unfortunately that kind of flaw is fairly pervasive. Yeah. Like talk a little bit about the Googlebot blacklisting in that context also. Like, in terms of,
I mean, if the issue basically boils down to, if I can make your site ban an arbitrary IP address, there are two levels to this. One was that you could prevent arbitrary IP addresses from logging in. So nobody could log in, see their orders, change their whatever, like they could not log into the site. And the other one is, which is even worse, is that you can prevent anybody from accessing the site. So the plugin would just like short circuit and say access denied or whatever. So they can't even see the site and respond with a
200.
No, not 200. What was it? Never mind. Either 500 or a too many requests status code. I don't remember the exact one right now. An error code, basically, either 400 or 500 error code, which to search engines like signalizes that your site is down. For example, if I then trick your site into blacklisting search engine crawlers, which for many search engines, they like publicly, their IP ranges are publicly known. So if you get a lot of those crawlers banned, like your site to google.com or to whatever crawler will just not serve your site, and basically like might get you delisted, or your Google ads might be stopped being served because they think that you're citing someone. So this is like a serious issue. It's not something to treat lightly.
Yeah, so it's like you could rank number one for managed WordPress hosting by just getting everybody that ranks above you delisted. And it's like that was real. Having that realization, I was actually in San Diego it was right after WordCamp. It was Troy Deaton's event, and you were talking me through that, and it was just like, well, what would be the value of that? And then it was like, oh yeah, you could literally like just delist all of your competitors if you wanted to, or just make it so that their Black Friday, Cyber Monday like doesn't work for your customers. So okay, so we've covered 2FA, we've covered password security, we've covered rate limiting. What's the
Correct.
fourth?
And the last one is session management, which is something that WordPress does not have at all, basically. But like not a lot of people know this. Not a lot of people know about this, but deeply buried inside WordPress core, WordPress is using something that is similar to sessions. And when I say sessions, I'm not referring to native PHP sessions, which are stored in the file system, which for many reasons are not the best solution. So what I mean is a session is like, think about just like a user session, a user like using your website. That is what I'm talking right now when I'm mentioning session. Sorry, where was I?
Yeah. So core uses a sort of session.
Correct. So WordPress core stores sessions in the database, which is why I don't know, but some time ago when you go to your WordPress profile page, there is like a button, lock me out on all devices, or just lock me out everywhere, but not on this device. To have this sort of functionality, you have to keep track of all sessions that the user is currently having in the database, and those are linked to the cookie the user provides when you visit your site, the authentication cookie. So those two are linked. And when you delete the sessions in the database, the cookie will also a valid, like from a structural point, a valid authentication cookie will not lock you in anymore. This is basically how it works currently in WordPress. That's all there is to it. So the only functionality is basically lock me out on all devices. And those are stored in the user meta table, as a matter of fact. So it's not like the most scalable and performant solution, because for every request, WordPress checks multiple times if the current provided cookie is valid, and each of those make calls to your user meta table. And if you have many users, this adds like a lot of rows to the user meta table, which is why like at some point your site becomes slow, because not just by WordPress core storing sessions there, but if you have like 100K users and then you have 100K sessions stored in there, then you have 10 plugins, and each of those store 100 other stuff there. It just all adds up. So what we've been able to do is use extension points in WordPress core that are officially supported, and replace the storage in the user meta table and put that into custom tables. So where then you have like proper indexes on the session token. So queries are super fast, lookups are super fast, writes to the sessions are very fast. And because this gives us a lot more control, we can implement a lot of functionality for sessions that are missing in WordPress to elaborate. For example, it's not the only way to authenticate as a user is not just to crack his password, obviously, or to access his primary credentials. What basically happens after you log in, WordPress creates a cookie, which will then always authenticate you as the user for whom you provided the password. If anybody could access your computer and somehow get that cookie, they can just put that cookie into their browser and they will be logged in as that user.
Yep.
And I remember, like, even in the grid, I don't remember what it's called, but a couple months ago, in the GridPen community, in the Facebook group, Thomas, Thomas, right?
Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, he posted like an article about a website that was selling stolen WordPress authentication cookies. So it was a website where, for many like popular sites, you could purchase stolen authentication cookies. How they were stolen, there are many ways. Like, we won't go into that now, but there are like several ways in which a cookie can be stolen, session fixation, a lot of different stuff. So you could just purchase a cookie and log in as the user who created the cookie originally, basically.
Yep.
Which is why it's very important that the site where you have logins has protections and session management best practices, which are that, for example, each session must have a very strict absolute timeout. So, like, I'm making those numbers up, but let's say 12 hours after you log in, you're logged out, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
This is, I'll explain why that's important later. I started the wrong way. Another one is an idle timeout, which is probably, you know that from your banking application, for example. If you log in and you just sit there for 5 minutes or so, you're logged out again, which prevents against several attacks. But like, the most simple one is just somebody walking to your PC and doing something there that they shouldn't be supposed to do. But also, if your basically site would log out any user that has not been active, and by active, like, I mean like making requests. I'm not like talking about tracking JavaScript mouse movement. I mean like a request from that same user to the server, like navigating to a new page or making an AJAX call, or that's what I mean by activity. So if a user does not generate activity for 5 minutes, or it depends on your security configurations and requirements, of course, but let's say a user does not make a request for 15 minutes, then the next time he does, after 15 minutes, he will not be logged in anymore, and we have to log in again, which is, for example, would have prevented all of those stolen cookies to work after they have been stolen. Because if the user did not have activity during that time, the cookie would not, even though he's still valid, it would be idle, basically. But now it makes sense why you also need an absolute timeout, because there is like an edge case where I steal your cookie, but you keep using the site. So basically, you're still generating activity, and the stolen cookie is still valid, right? While you keep using the site. So if you also have an absolute timeout, then even if I get access to your site, I will be very hardly limited by how long I can keep using that cookie until I'm logged out again. The other thing we have is like a rotation timeout, which is basically every X minutes, the session ID is regenerated. So you're not logged out, but the cookie values are changed. So that if a cookie had been stolen, you only have 5 minutes to start using that cookie until it's rotated and not valid again. So only the first, after 5 minutes have passed, the first person to visit the site again with that cookie gets the new one, and the old one is deleted and won't work anymore. This is the rotation protection. And the last one, which is also pretty cool, and is the we call it like the sudo mode from the like analogy to the command line tool, is where after you log in, you're put into sudo mode for, let's say, 15 minutes. And then you can configure and define protected or sensitive pages where you can only navigate to if you're in sudo mode. And if you're not, then you have to provide either your password again, or if you have it activated, your two-factor authentication code. So a common example where this is used is probably, let's say, on Amazon, right? You're logged in for a very long time, but as soon as you try to go to a page like that changes your credit card settings or your billing or whatever, then you have to provide your password again. And if you then leave or whatever and are absent for a longer period, you need to provide it again. So you're not logged out, but you can't access that page. So this is these are the four main components that we are protecting against. And let's say, is there anything more? Probably, but I think it's enough probably, right?
Yeah, we got enough.
Don't ram too much.
Yeah. Well, and just that case in the admin bar just yesterday where the person had like 5,000 fake cards tried on his account. It's like you pinged me and we're like, this is what we should build in next, because I don't see WooCommerce doing this anytime soon. So we could build rate limit. If they're not going to build rate limiting, then we can tack that on. And it's similar, just thinking about this exact idea of like, where are the secure sites? Where are the secure portions of your site, or the mission critical portions of your site, where you should be forcing additional authentication, additional revalidation more frequently, so that people can't just walk off with my laptop and just access whatever they want, because they cut my finger off and they stole my MacBook Pro,
Yeah. One example would be, let's say, if you're using a backup plugin, for example, no session should be able to access anything for backup related. If you're not 100% sure that they just recently logged in with all the required credentials. So if you have Remember Me enabled when you log in and like you were there for 2 weeks, like you should have to provide the information again. But then on the other side, like it's probably okay if you're like, I don't know, what else there in WordPress, like visit the...
There's commenting on Barstool.
Yeah, commenting on a blog post or whatever. Right?
Yeah.
And all of those things will be configurable, and also configurable for per user role. So what we basically would encourage or like recommend is that which is something that people should do anyways, but not a lot of people talk about it or do, is that you clearly separate like administrative tasks from editorial tasks. Like you should have one user account for changing plugins, updating plugins, all of those things, backups, configuring plugins. This should be done by administrative accounts, where you can then place very, very harsh limits for idle timeouts, like 5 minutes, and which would disturb you normal users. But then for your WooCommerce customers, you can just let them be logged in for who cares, like until forever, until they access a protected page, and then they need to authenticate again. So like this is what's basically the intended use case. Which is something that people should do anyway. You should not like update the pricing information for your WooCommerce products with the same user account that you use for managing plugins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's unfortunate, but almost, if we looked at the more than 100,000 sites that are on GridPain right now, I bet, at least 50, if not 80% of our clients have an admin account, probably, and it's like, that should just not be the case. And so hopefully this will get people doing, having a much better posture as relates to the security of their sites. So we're knocking up on roughly an hour here. Do you want to share your screen and show us kind of a quick little demo of where we are right now? Does that make sense?
Yeah, just would like to add first that like a lot of this stuff is like behind the scenes. It's not like a plugin where like you see a lot of what is going on. A lot of that is behind the scenes. Obvious exceptions are the two-factor authentication stuff, which I can show right now. And we also, the thing that I should have mentioned first is what we try to do. It's like we are building it in a way that you need the least like amount of configuration possible. Like it should just like work out of the box, even though for very advanced use cases, you can configure every single bit of how this plugin behaves, but we like not exposing it to begin with if it's not needed, basically. Why are we doing this? Because first of all, there are two aspects. First of all, like you as an end user, like do you really want to go through like 50 different screens and tab bars and settings, and like it's just like not a good user experience to do all of this stuff because and the second one is, which is like more significant in my opinion, is that we offload the difficult decisions to make to you. So instead of us thinking deeply and like what I was saying with the user roles and stuff, like instead of us coming up with those rules, basically, or best practices, we offload, and it's a difficult task. I mean, you have to know a lot of web security, basically, to properly configure this. Instead of us doing that hard work, like we'd be offloading it to the end user, and you would have to come up with effective schemes or effective configuration, which is, I mean, I just think not realistic, like at scale, basically.
Yeah.
So
well,
and that's why
I mean, that's part of what we're going to be.
It's a very deliberate approach we're taking there.
Yeah, that's part of what we're going to be discovering too as we roll this out in, the first beta cases or whatever, and all the people that are going to be testing this is like, we can imagine a lot of good examples, but there's going to be somebody who has, a ton of WooCommerce sites that they're going to have some specific edge case, and we'll be able to work with them to go, oh yeah, that's a good use case, and that's a configuration that would solve for that. And the benefit of us doing these things all together is that then that learning will go right back into the development of Fortress. And then those things will also be things that can be automated fully inside of GridPane, so that you can say, hey, I want these settings across all my sites. That's very formulaic and straightforward, Yeah.
All right. Let me screen my sheet and my screen here. See if that works.
It's coming up.
It's loading. Can you see anything?
I see the loading bar. For all the listeners at home, we're trying out this new Riverside, which is obviously an alternative to Zoom, and maybe that's not going to work. Worst case scenario, if we have to, what we will do is post.
Oh no, we got it. Yeah.
Post. Still not loading on
my. See now? I can see my screen now.
No. Oh yeah, I see it now. Yep.
Perfect. So this is another thing that I forgot to mention is regarding two-factor authentication. If you have a site, I'm just making things up. Basically, you are a site which produces a lot of content, and you have a lot of employees or a lot of people basically that are intern to your company. They should be using two-factor authentication. Like you should not manually have to check that those people are using two-factor authentication. It should be enforced at the code level, basically. Anytime you log in and you don't have that activated and set up, like you literally cannot go to any different page.
Yep, you can't skip it.
The one where you can set it up. We can't skip it. We can skip it once, but that's about it. If you have an emergency right now, but like once and that's it.
Yep.
Which
so
is,
like once it's activated,
and
one time, but then you can't just have, like you said, you can't have your employees just go, yeah, I'll get to that, and then weeks later they've never done it.
Correct. And the other thing is, after all your users, or basically all the important user roles, like on your typical WordPress site, administrator, maybe the editors, WooCommerce managers, it depends what you're using. After all the roles that you consider privileged or important have set up the two-factor authentication, you can flip a switch, or basically you can configure the plugin as such that if a user with that role tries to log in and does not have it set up, he won't be able to log in.
Yeah.
Why is that? Because if I hack, for example, your database, right? And your user account currently has two-factor authentication enabled. How all of those plugins or all current solutions work is, if I just, and obviously this requires me to have full access to your database, but again, like we're already assuming your primary credentials are compromised in some way.
Yep.
If I just delete the row where your two-factor authentication settings are stored, the plugin will think you have not configured it, and you will just be able to log in with username and password, which is why after all privileged users have that configured, we allow you to flip a switch, and basically if somebody tried to log in then, that does not have it yet configured yet, they won't be able to log in. So if you delete the row, it will just respond like with a generic message like two-factor authentication is required for your account. Please contact your administrator, basically, because it's worth having that. Obviously, you can't do that if you're like onboarding new editors like twice a day, but realistically, like for how many sites is that going to be the case? In that case, you can just turn that feature off.
So that's a good, because like, so what that solves for, and that's just one of the ways that all of your stuff solves for this, is like literally I can have control of the database itself. I can have a write SQL injection, which is basically 10 out of 10, you're going to get root at that point. If you have a write SQL injection and your file system and database are on the same server, which for most people, even in GridPen, is like the default, right? Then basically a skilled attacker will be able to take over the entire server. But for the rare cases where maybe your file system is immutable or your database is like, because you're at that scale, your database is using is an external server, right? Then you can't escalate from the MySQL instance to the file system. And at that point, it's really important to have those sort of protections that altering the data in the database, you can't just authenticate. Another example is, which works by default in WordPress, if I'm a subscriber at your site and I know that my password is Calvin, and I want to authenticate as you, Patrick, the administrator, and I've hacked your database, I can just go into the database and locate my hash for my password, which I know to be Calvin, swap them, and then I use your username, my passwords, and I just log in. And this works by default in WordPress. You can try that out and on a staging site in PHP-admin, create two users, change the password hashes in the database, and then you can use your own password for the other user. And we are protecting against all those cases because this is part of the password module, where basically each password that is hashed is also bound to a specific user ID. So, and if either one of those is tempered, so if anything is swapped around, the user IDs are changed, or the password hash itself are swapped with another user, it will not validate anymore. Like, it will basically crash. So you need to know that something very suspicious is going on there. And this is also the case where you can just delete the two-factor settings, which is just another application of that. Anyway, I think I'll have to log in again here. Let's see. Because I pulled it up some time ago. So this is just a default WordPress installation. No plugins installed besides Fortress. I guess I could start by showing, I have just one user, the administrator. With a really good password too, right?
Yeah,
really.
It's because it's a development site that I just created here on local Docker. It's just admin, and admin, please don't ever do this, of course. So this will lock me in, but if I use like a wrong password and I repeat that request a couple of times, you can immediately see that now we are being rate limited. So it says here, don't attempt to log in within the next 15 minutes or your account might get banned. So this is the default. You have per username a burst of 5 tries, so you can fail 5 times as fast as you want. After that, you get 1 try every 15 minutes. So I now have to wait 15 minutes before even valid credentials will lock me in again. So if I try now with admin and admin, like this request is just being dropped. So even if it's correct, I can log in until 15 minutes have passed. And then I have another try. And if that's invalid again, another 15 minutes. If I wait 5 times 15, which is what?
75.
75, I'm sorry. If it's then it's 75. Then I have 5 attempts again, but it can never go above 5. So
Gotcha.
5 the burst, and then it refills.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I were to try like an editor, this username doesn't exist, but then this is fine. If I keep doing this now, actually, I think it might be a good try now. So what if we get editor banned also? Okay, now editor's banned, which means we have made 10 failed requests. Let's now try subscriber. Make 5 more. Let's see. I hope it went through in Chrome. I think by default I have it configured right now. Now it kicked in. Now the limit is 30 minutes. It's not 15 anymore. So we are not limited by the username anymore. We are now rate limited by IP address, which is more harsh, but we also have a larger burst, which I think right now it's set to 20, if my math is correct here. And now, even if the username limit is back up, you're still limited. So basically, it's always the highest one, right?
Correct.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So it's always the highest one that applies. Then, but let's say now, imagine this is now the attacker, right? Now I'm on a different computer and I try to log in, right? Obviously, I can't fake my IP right now, but I try with admin and I can't log in. I obviously wouldn't see the IP limit now. I would see the username limit because I would have a different IP address. But what I can do then, if I have not been logged in before, I can request a link to be sent to my account, which will then allow me to skip the waiting time. So if I insert admin, right? Let's see if that works. What is it? Interport. Yeah, so this is local mail client that I have here. I'm having a link here. If I click this link, well, all right, and now remember my device and proceed to log in. Now I'm back to the login form, so I don't get logged in, obviously, because that would just remove the password if I have your email account. But now if I log in as the administrator, you see that it worked, because now I'm I have that correct device ID. If I now open it up in the, how does it work? I normally don't use Chrome here. Can you see private tab now? Yeah, right?
Yep.
Where did it go?
Yeah, we had it.
Now, if I try to do it now in Incognito tab, which does not have this cookie, and I try with admin and admin, I'm still rate limited. So the attacker is rate limited, while the legitimate user never even experienced that any rate limiting is in place at all. And if he logs out now and logs in again, it will still be the same thing. So because now I was logging in as an administrator, it recognizes that I have to set up two-factor authentication. I can skip this right now, then I'm in. And then you can access two-factor settings, like with a little link here in your site, in your profile. Now, it's pretty basic. Like, you can create two-factor authentication settings. I'll use like a little TCP generator. Obviously, never put any real secrets into a site like this.
Right.
See? Grab that one. All right, now I get it's completed now. Obviously, if you would have provided invalid code, wouldn't have worked, pre-standard stuff. Can go back to my profile. Now I can generate new recovery codes or deactivate two-factor authentication. This will only work, like I said, if you don't have the switch flipped that deactivating two-factor authentication, you would basically lock yourself out because it's required for your role, correct? But it's not the default right now, so I can deactivate it. So now the next time I'm trying to log in is admin, I'm presented with a two-factor authentication screen.
Yep.
And then, let's see. Now I get basically back to where I wanted. And the way we implemented this is so that it's, why are we doing a redirect and not many plugins are doing it with some weird, like they load JavaScript on a default login page and then like they're doing weird stuff to intercept it and present the code, switch the forms. Why do we not do this way? Like for a very like deliberate reasons, because this is not compatible with the way people create WordPress sites, basically. So because there's so many different plugins, like you could be running BuddyBoss or you could be running WooCommerce, or like there's no limit on how people are able to log in your site. Maybe you have a custom page entirely. Maybe you're using Elementor login. I don't know. Like there's so many different possibilities. The redirect basically is the most compatible approach by default. And after the redirect, we just take you to where you were going anyway. So this works out of the box, for example, with WooCommerce. Should we actually try that right now? We could, right?
Sure. We got 50 settings for.
I think, for example, WordFence does not support custom login forms at all. Like many of the plugins support only the default WordPress login page, which obviously then, like if you want to offer to your customers two-factor authentication, will not work. Let's say you are a store and you're selling something and you want to offer to your customers two-factor authentication. It has to work on custom login forms, not the default login forms.
Right.
Let's see. Installing WooCommerce will probably take
forever.
Quite some time here.
Yep.
Let's see.
So the biggest thing is, so in terms of what you were talking about, as far as light, the lightest interface possible, like all of these things right now, and I think in, future versions of this, there'll be more configuration options in the UI, but right now, a lot of these things are just pure config driven and as light as humanly possible. So that, again, the end customer, the users of GridPane and GridPane's clients, they're not having to go, well, what does session management mean? Like it's almost in the beginning, we don't want to expose any of these things. But probably in the long run, we'll do like an advanced mode where it's like, if you want to go get in and mess around and yet you don't want to go into the CLI or you don't want to directly modify the configs, there'll be options for that. But it's just the minimum viable dose to get the maximum impact. And again, no security theater, no random things that are running in plugin space that should actually be running at server level or should be running upstream at Cloudflare.
Correct. Basically, the way we built this currently is it's CLI first.
Yep.
Basically, for many plugins, like the WP CLI is like a total afterthought.
Yes. Right.
Maybe they have like one command or whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
We did it differently. Basically, anything that you can do, currently you can do way more in the CLI than you can in the user interface. But anything that I just showed you could be running as part of like an automated site setup through WP CLI commands. Everything, like literally everything I just showed you could be done through CLI commands that we already have.
Yeah.
And in the future, like the UI that I'm just.
Yeah, that's a big reason that we like here at GridPane is because we're so, that's where we think about things. Like we think about living at the command line and resolving things at the server level. And it's like, that's where things should live. And it is disappointing that it's like for so many plugins, they don't even do anything with WP CLI at all, or again, it's like one or two main functions, and it's like, why didn't you build the whole thing into this so that you can automate these things at scale? You know, like, just blows my mind. Right. But anyway.
Yeah. So I mean, what you could do is basically at GridPaint, like for every new site that you create, you basically run a CLI command for the administrator to already have two-factor authentication be set up.
Yeah.
It could just already be set up, and then you could use a recovery code to log in, and after that you can basically configure it on your own device, something like that.
Yep.
So now I think WooCommerce is installed here. If I'm at the My Account page, I should be able to log in as administrator here. And after that, so it picks up that I have two-factor authentication enabled here.
Yeah, and it redirects you. Yeah.
If I log in, then it's like picked up where you came from, basically. And then you get back to your My Account page.
Yeah.
So it's pretty like good user experience, but like this would, for example, not be possible if you were hooking somehow into the WooCommerce login form with, like, I mean, you could, but you would have to add like and this is ultimately what bloats your site, because what those plugins are doing is checking, okay, do we have WooCommerce? If yes, then we have to load this WooCommerce specific stuff. But like, I mean, where do you stop? Then people will eventually come like, but I'm using BuddyBus. Like, and it works with the WooCommerce forms, but it doesn't work with BuddyBus. How can you please add BuddyBus support? And then you either go down like basically the else if hell. So you have like 25 nested statements, and do we use this? Do we use this? And then even worse, does WooCommerce is configured to? Does WooCommerce has this option enabled? And I mean, it's hell to maintain. It's super brittle, because then if they change something, like now our releases are dependent on WooCommerce, what they are doing is like very brittle, very hard to maintain, and also slows down the site. Or you could go down, which is another problematic way, it's like the extension hell, where basically you have like Fortress, and then you have 25 different Fortress add-ons, basically.
Yeah, right.
So this is the most scalable way, and from user experience perspective, I think it's pretty good.
Cleanest.
You just get and obviously in future versions, it will be totally possible to customize the UI that you're seeing on a two-factor authentication page. But it's just like not a priority right now for the first version, because we want to like get a working alternative out to address the security concerns that we saw like as fast as possible. And then the UI is just, by having like white labeling the UI, is basically just busy work at this point. It's not complicated. It's not like the hard stuff. The hard stuff is what runs in the background, and the UI is just like a matter of busy work.
Yeah.
So let's see. Is there anything else? I could show. The last thing I could show is how the confirm account stuff works. Let me see if I can. I'll simulate being idle in the database right now, so we obviously don't have to wait here. Let's see.
Yeah, so while you're cooking that up, I will. I'm just going to recap things for everybody. Yeah. So again, Calvin's been a key member of our community for a good long time now, and we've been very, very impressed with everything that he's discovered in his security research, and we're thrilled to be the first hosting company on the face of the planet to help build what we believe to be truly secure WordPress. And when you combine this functionality with control at the stack level, especially with things like immutable file systems and things like PatchStack for proactive vulnerability management, I just don't see how you can go any further down this rabbit hole. And so Fortress will definitely be a part of what it is that we're rolling out with this new Black Friday, Cyber Monday Developer Plus promotion, and what Fortress will be right out of the gate, and certainly becoming more and more polished through the end of the year and through Q1 2023. Is at the very least these four main components of just absolute crucial security, which is two-factor authentication, secure two-factor authentication with rate limiting and error detection and enforcement, much stronger password management and encryption of all of those passwords, proper proper rate limiting and allowing people access, even in the event of a massive DDoS or a rate limiting event. And then this session management, which I hadn't even really thought about this before, but this is especially for like a large scale, like LMS or BuddyBoss site, like even without the even just setting aside the security implications of it, I imagine they would see just performance increases just by having, better indexes of those sessions. Like I just saw something about a week ago. It was a website where they had like an abandoned cart plugin that had something like 500,000 rows in it, and just those 500,000 rows weren't indexed at all. And so the back end was just insanely bloated and slow. And just by literally having a correct index of those rows, we went from like a 14-second back end load time to like a 600 millisecond back end load time. So I don't imagine you've tested that, but I suspect that there's going to be performance improvements just with that. Yeah. I mean, at scale, what do you think?
Compared to default WordPress or?
Yeah, compared to
default. I've not tested at that scale. I've tested let's not lie about it. Like every plugin that you add is going to add some overhead to the baseline of WordPress.
Yep.
What we try to do is we try to keep it as minimal as possible.
Yeah.
Both through development practices and like correct feature implementation. And basically, whenever you read on any like marketing page for WordPress plugins, the phrase like built with performance in mind.
Yeah, right.
You can translate that to we have done nothing at all and just hope for the best, basically.
Right.
This is how you can translate that. But just a couple of examples that I could bring up. Like everything we do, we use custom tables, obviously, like all of the two-factor secrets, everything is the rate limits, everything uses custom tables with proper indexes, like really like index building is like, it's not just something where you can just say, I would just add an index on the primary key and that's it. Like you would basically have to look at every single query that you're making, and then there are basically step-by-step formulas you can take to like get the final correct index. So this is something that we do wherever possible. We're using the object cage if you have it. For example, the rate limiting stuff, all of that is working using the object cage. So it's very performant if you have something like Redis or even the relay stuff that you're adding now. This is the default. If you have it installed, it's using the object cage. And instead of storing every failed login like other plugins, so if you have 1 million failed logins, like you just inserted 1 million rows into your database, or basically, we just, like the way we implemented it, we just have to store the counter. So we just have to store like IPX count 1. And if another attempt is made, we just increment the count instead of storing another row, basically.
Yeah, right. Right.
Well, I mean, we're using like real proper. I mean, that's not going to too. I don't want to go too much into the technical PHP side of things. Like, if anybody's interested, like just drop that later in the Facebook post that we're going to make, and I can like nerd more about it. But it's probably not going to be interesting to most of you now.
No, and it'll be like it starts being over my head. We should probably stop. So, So what you did, it looks like what you did there is you simulated.
I have like a debug command where I can basically force a session to not be in pseudo mode anymore, and that should have worked now. So, for example, this page by default is not a protected page. It's not sensitive. Well, I mean, you could make it sensitive depending on the type of widgets that you're having here.
Sure.
But if you go to the plugins page now, this is a very sensitive page, and you cannot access that page if you don't confirm your password, basically.
Yep.
So if I confirm it, then I get back, and now I can access all of those sensitive pages again for the next 15 minutes.
Yep.
So now I can load this page as and if I run this command again, or I force myself to be locked out, then I can't access it anymore.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, I'm taking up I've taken up enough of your time here. I think what we'll just go ahead and post this into the Facebook group as is, and then sort of open it up for anybody's Q&A there. And we might obviously, as we go here, we'll probably do another one of these. But I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate everything you do, and share in the community. And I'm cautiously optimistic that a whole bunch of people are going to be super fired up about this, because I definitely am. And I think that it's really important. And unfortunately, as we've seen, it's the entire security posture of the WordPress ecosystem needs to change dramatically. And and I'm hoping that this is the first in many salvos of us beating that dead horse, I guess. So,
well, hopefully,
yeah. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time. I'll talk to you soon. Yeah. Yep. Bye bye.